I was driving past my son-in-law's house and decided to stop by to see how he was doing. When I saw my wife's car, a shiny silver Lexus that was supposed to be in our garage, parked at the front gate, my heart tightened and I felt a sense of unease. I thought to myself, something's not right. I quietly walked toward the window, trying to remain unnoticed. What I heard inside shattered my world and changed my life forever. Margaret's voice, like a poisonous whisper, floated out of the partially open window. When the old fool finally signs the papers, we'll get everything we've been planning for. I was sitting motionless in my car outside my daughter's house, the keys still in the ignition. Only a few minutes earlier, I'd called my daughter, Brianna, hoping to surprise her with dinner. "Sorry, Dad," she had told me cheerfully. "I'm not home. But Dave is there, working on some case files." Yet, here was Margaret's silver Lexus, parked right in the driveway for all to see. I turned off the engine and approached the window, my legs trembling. Through the gap in the curtains, I could see them clearly, my wife of 25 years, lounging on my daughter's couch as if she owned it, and Dave leaning against the bookshelf with that arrogant look I had come to despise. "The timing is perfect," Dave was saying, his lawyer's voice sharp with satisfaction. "File in June, claim irreconcilable differences. With the new Iowa laws, Margaret is entitled to half of all assets acquired during the marriage, plus lifetime alimony." Margaret laughed, a sound that I once found charming. "The construction business alone is worth $12 million, she said. "Plus the rental properties, the vacation home, and the investments. We're looking at close to $20 million in total." My hands shook as I grabbed my phone and began recording just as Dave continued with his legal explanation. "The best part is his trusting nature. Alan has no idea we've been documenting his assets for months. Bank statements, property deeds, business valuations, everything has already been copied." He gestured toward a manila folder on the coffee table. He practically handed us the keys to his kingdom. 2 years of pretending to be a loyal wife," Margaret said while inspecting her perfectly manicured nails. I could hear the contempt in her voice. "Pretending to care about his boring construction stories and nodding sympathetically when he worried about payroll. God, the man actually believes I love him." A twig snapped under my foot. They both froze, their heads snapping toward the window like startled deer. I flattened myself against the brick wall, my heart pounding in my chest and sweat beading on my skin despite the cool April air. "Did you hear something?" Margaret's voice carried a hint of suspicion. "Probably just the neighbor's cat," Dave replied after a moment of silence. "You're just being paranoid." "Can you blame me if Alan discovers this before we're ready?" she asked. "He won't. The man couldn't spot a conspiracy even if it were lit up by a neon sign," Dave replied with a cold laugh. "By September, you'll be divorced, rich, and free to do whatever you want with whoever you want." I forced myself to stay hidden until their conversation resumed, my phone recording every hateful word. When I finally crept back to my car about 15 minutes later, my entire world had been turned upside down. 25 years of marriage, reduced to a legal strategy session between my wife and my son-in-law. The folder on the coffee table haunted me. Months of planning, documenting, and preparing. While I had been working 16-hour days to build our future, they had been systematically planning to destroy it. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at my hands on the steering wheel, the same hands that had built a construction empire from nothing, that had provided every comfort Margaret enjoyed, that had walked her down the aisle when her own father had refused to attend our wedding. Margaret's voice echoed in my memory. "The man actually believes I love him." The worst part was that until 30 minutes ago, I had believed the same thing. The front door opened just as I reached for my car keys. Margaret came out first, her designer handbag swinging casually at her side, followed by Dave, who was adjusting his tie with practiced precision. Neither of them expected to find me sitting in my Honda, and the shock showed on Margaret's face like a physical blow. "Alan," she said, her voice an octave higher. "What are you doing here?" I forced my expression to look normal, even though my heart was pounding in my ears. 25 years of marriage had taught me how to read her moods, but it turned out she had been faking it all along. "Just finished a job site inspection nearby," I said smoothly, getting out of the car. "I thought I'd stop by to see Brianna." Dave stepped closer to Margaret, his instincts as a lawyer kicking in. His pale gray eyes studied my face with an uncomfortable intensity, searching for any hint of a lie. "She's not here. Margaret said quickly. We were just. I was helping Dave organize some legal documents for a client. The lie came so easily to her. I wondered how many lies I had believed over the years without questioning them. Oh, I said, keeping my voice light and easy. I thought you were at work until 6 today. Didn't you mention something about the Henderson proposal this morning? A flicker of panic crossed her face, but she recovered quickly. I left early, she said. Headache. Sorry to hear that, I replied. I turned to Dave with a manufactured friendliness. Working on an interesting case? Asset division, he answered without thinking, then quickly corrected himself. For a divorce client. A very complex financial situation. The irony would have been funny if it weren't destroying my life. Margaret's eyes moved between Dave and me, calculating. How long have you been here, Alan? Just pulled up, I said. Why? No reason, she replied, but her smile seemed forced. You look tense. Is everything okay? The woman who had been plotting my financial ruin for months was asking about my well-being. I almost laughed. Long day, you know how it is. I gestured toward Dave. Don't let me interrupt your work session. We were just finishing up, Dave said, his hand resting on the small of Margaret's back. The gesture seemed natural and intimate. I wondered how long that had been going on. Good timing, then. I pulled out my phone to check the time, making sure they could see the device. Neither of them reacted, but I noticed Dave's eyes lingering on the screen. I should head home anyway. Dinner won't cook itself. Margaret's laugh sounded fake. I'll be along shortly. Just need to wrap up a few things here. Take your time, I said. I opened my car door, then paused as if I had just remembered something. Oh, Margaret, Dr. Patterson's office called about rescheduling your physical. Something about a conflict with your work schedule. Her face went blank for a second, the look of someone whose lie had been exposed. She recovered with impressive speed. Must be a mix-up. I'll call them later. No worries. These things happen. I slid into the driver's seat, my heart pounding. See you both later. As I backed out of the driveway, I watched them in my rearview mirror. They stood frozen until my car disappeared around the corner, then immediately moved closer together, their heads bent in an urgent conversation. The three of us were now in a strange dance of deception. They suspected that I might have overheard something, and I knew they were planning to destroy me. Yet, all of us were pretending that everything was perfectly normal. Margaret would drive home separately, ready with explanations for her early departure from work and her presence at Dave's house. She would probably have a dozen reasonable justifications by the time she walked through the front door, but she didn't know about the recording on my phone, 43 minutes of crystal-clear audio that would change everything. I drove into traffic, my hands steady on the steering wheel for the first time in an hour. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something colder and more focused. They thought they were playing chess with someone who only knew how to play checkers. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The 15-minute drive home was a blur of traffic lights and muscle memory. My Honda found its way into our circular driveway without my conscious direction, past the manicured gardens Margaret insisted we pay someone else to maintain, and past the fountain she had ordered for our 20th anniversary. I sat in the car for several minutes, staring at the house I had built with my own hands in 1995. Every piece of wood, every nail, every carefully planned detail had been a love letter to the woman who was now plotting to steal it from me. The front door opened to a silence that felt different now. It was not peaceful, but empty. Margaret's presence had always filled these rooms with chatter about her day, complaints about our neighbors, and excitement about new purchases. Now, I wondered how much of it had been an act. The wedding photo on the mantel caught my eye. December 15th, 1987. Margaret, radiant in an ivory silk dress. I, awkward in a rented tuxedo. Both of us glowing with what I believed was genuine happiness. She was 22, working as a secretary at Morrison & Associates downtown. I was 37, and my construction business was finally starting to make a real profit after 10 years of 12-hour days and ramen noodle dinners. We met at the company Christmas party that year. Morrison was a client. I had renovated their offices the previous spring. Margaret had laughed at my terrible joke about concrete mixers, a sound like silver bells that made my heart flutter with an unexpected feeling of longing. When I asked her to dinner, she blushed and said yes so quickly that I wondered if she had been waiting for me to ask. Our first date at Romano's Italian restaurant lasted until midnight. She listened with sincere interest as I described my dreams of building something lasting, something that would outlive us both. Her eyes sparkled when I talked about the homes I wanted to create and the families I wanted to shelter. "You're not just building structures," she had said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "You're building homes." I proposed 6 months later. On the kitchen table was our 25th anniversary card from last December. Margaret's elegant handwriting in blue ink read, "To my wonderful husband, thank you for making all my dreams come true. Here's to 25 more years of happiness. All my love, Margaret." All her love. The words tasted bitter now. I went into the living room, where Brianna's baby pictures were lined up on the built-in shelves I had crafted during Margaret's pregnancy. June 8th, 1995, the day our daughter was born. Margaret, exhausted but glowing, holding our red-faced miracle as if she had been created for motherhood. Those first years were the happiest of my life. Margaret threw herself into being a mother with the same passion she had once brought to planning our wedding. Parent-teacher conferences, soccer games, birthday parties with elaborate themes, she documented every moment with intense maternal pride. "You're the best father in the world," she told me the night Brianna graduated high school, tears streaming down her face as we watched our daughter receive her diploma. "She's going to do amazing things because of the foundation you gave her." The foundation I gave her, not we. I wondered if the cracks had been visible even then. I sank into my leather recliner, the one Margaret always complained was too ugly for the formal living room, and let the memories wash over me. Our 10th anniversary cruise to Alaska, where Margaret was truly delighted by the glaciers and the wildlife. Brianna's college graduation, where all of us cried as she walked across the stage with her psychology degree. Christmas mornings filled with laughter and chaos, where Margaret insisted on elaborate decorations that took weeks to put up and one day to take down. When had gratitude turned into a sense of entitlement? When had "thank you for providing this life" become "we deserve so much more"? The recording on my phone held the answer. Margaret hadn't loved me in years, perhaps even decades. Every kiss, every anniversary celebration, every "I love you" whispered in the darkness had been a calculated act. A manipulation designed to keep me working, earning, and building wealth that she could eventually claim as her own. 25 years of my life, reduced to a legal strategy session. I sat in the growing darkness of our living room, surrounded by evidence of what I had believed was a happy marriage, and felt something cold and analytical settle over my grief. Margaret thought she was playing the long game, positioning herself for the greatest financial gain while still being able to deny her intentions. She had no idea that her husband possessed the same strategic mind that had built a construction empire from nothing. The game was about to change. The living room's silence surrounded me as I forced myself to think like the businessman I had always been. When did Margaret's behavior change from that of a real partner to a calculated one? The answer came with an uncomfortable clarity. In 2020, when my company, Allen Construction, was awarded the Morrison Municipal Center contract, worth $50 million over 3 years, the largest project in the company's history. I had come home that April evening expecting a celebration, maybe some champagne, and definitely the enthusiastic support that had sustained me through every previous milestone. Instead, Margaret was sitting at the kitchen table with a real estate magazine and a calculator. "This means we can finally afford the house on Elm Street," she announced without looking up. "The one with the circular driveway and the pool. The Hendersons are asking $4.2 million. There were no congratulations on the achievement, no pride in the work that would employ 300 people for 3 years. Just an immediate focus on what my success could buy her. "Margaret, I haven't even started the project yet. There's design work, permits, subcontractor negotiations," I said. "But the money is guaranteed, right?" she asked. She finally looked at me, her green eyes calculating. "I mean, once you sign the contract, the city has to pay." The conversation lasted 2 hours. She mapped out expenditures down to the last detail. The new house, a country club membership, luxury cars, European vacations. Not our expenditures, but hers. The pronouns were telling, though I had been too focused on project logistics to notice. By 2021, her demands had become even greater. The country club membership became a necessity when the Pattersons joined Riverside Hills. Our perfectly adequate vacation cabin in Wisconsin became embarrassing compared to the Johnsons' place in Aspen. Margaret began dropping hints about other wives whose husbands really understood how to treat a woman. Physical intimacy gradually disappeared, so slowly that I had blamed it on age and stress. Separate bedrooms became necessary because of my snoring, even though Margaret had never complained about my snoring in 23 years of marriage. Dinner conversations shifted from discussions about our day to Margaret's detailed accounts of what other families owned, achieved, or displayed. Sarah Mitchell's husband bought her a Mercedes for their anniversary last month, she mentioned, precisely cutting her salmon, just because he appreciated everything she had sacrificed for their marriage. Sacrificed, as if supporting my career while living in luxury had required a significant personal loss. Her friendship with Dave had become more intense after Brianna's wedding in September 2023. Suddenly, Margaret was fascinated by legal proceedings, asking hypothetical questions about property division and spousal rights for a friend who might need advice. She had started getting phone calls that sent her to another room, where she claimed they were book club discussions or volunteer committee meetings. How many of those calls had actually been conspiracy sessions? I pulled out my phone and listened to parts of the day's recording. Dave's voice. We've been documenting his assets for months. Margaret's laughter. 2 years of playing the devoted wife. The documentation made sense now. Margaret's sudden interest in my financial reports, her questions about business valuations, and her insistence on joint accounts while maintaining her own separate credit cards. She had been conducting reconnaissance while I had been building the very empire she planned to steal. But Margaret had made a critical mistake in her strategic planning. She had underestimated the man who had built Allen Construction from a single truck and a borrowed set of tools. The same analytical mind that had managed 35 years of construction projects, labor negotiations, and city contracts was now focused on a different kind of problem. They thought they were playing chess with someone who didn't know the rules. Margaret had spent months positioning her pieces, assuming I would never notice the board. She was about to find out that her husband understood strategy better than she could have ever imagined. I stood up from the recliner and walked to my home office, where files containing 35 years of business records were arranged on the built-in shelves. Tax returns, contracts, partnership agreements, property deeds, everything Margaret thought she had been secretly documenting. But I knew something she didn't. The real assets were not in those files. I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. Marcus Webb, my accountant, my friend, and the only person who knew about the offshore arrangements I had established years ago for tax purposes. It was time to make a call that would change everything. 3 days of methodical research had turned my home office into a war room. 2 laptops hummed quietly on the mahogany desk I had built 15 years ago, their screens displaying bank statements, legal databases, and property records. Yellow legal pads covered every surface, filled with columns labeled assets, weaknesses, timeline, and leverage points. I had shaved carefully that morning, put on my best navy suit, and put on the reading glasses Margaret always said made me look distinguished. It was strange how quickly grief could turn into a strategy when you had 35 years of business experience to draw from. Marcus Webb had been more helpful than I had dared to hope. 3 offshore accounts I had established years ago for tax optimization were completely legal and fully documented, but invisible to anyone without forensic accounting skills. Margaret's amateur reconnaissance mission had missed the real treasure. She had been cataloging the visible kingdom while the crown jewels remained hidden in plain sight. But Margaret had also been busy. Her credit card statements told a fascinating story. $47,000 in unauthorized transfers over 8 months had been funneled to a joint savings account I had never opened. The beneficiary's name made my jaw clench, Daniel Thompson. They had been positioning themselves as financial partners long before their divorce conspiracy began. Luxury lunches at Riverside Country Club, $300 spa treatments, designer clothing purchases that suspiciously coincided with her book club meetings. Every expense painted a picture of a woman preparing for a different life. The 8th out of 500 designer handbags she had bought last Tuesday was especially ironic, considering she had just complained about grocery costs that morning. Dave's vulnerabilities proved to be even more revealing. My contacts in the construction industry were generous with information about Davenport's most ambitious attorney. The man who planned to steal my fortune was drowning in debt. $180,000 in student loans, an $8,500 monthly office lease chosen for image over prudence, and a growing reputation for cutting ethical corners when his payments were due. Thompson is a sharp lawyer. Jim Morrison of Morrison Concrete had told me over coffee. Jim had told me that Dave's desires far outstripped his means. He owed 3 of my subcontractors close to $25,000. He would always promise to pay them the following week, then vanish when the bills became due. A search on the State Bar Association's website revealed 2 ethical complaints against him in the last year, both of which had been dismissed but were still part of his official record. Both had to do with his mishandling of client funds. I knew that even a dismissed complaint could tarnish a lawyer's reputation in the legal community. I settled back in my leather chair and looked over all the information I had gathered over 72 hours of careful investigation. Margaret and Dave had made a grave error by underestimating me. They had only seen a trusting husband who worked long hours and seldom questioned household spending. They had failed to see the strategic mind that had built my company from a single truck into a $12 million enterprise. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts, and I saw Brianna's name on the screen. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice calm and friendly. "How's your day going?" She immediately said she needed to ask me something, her tone carrying the same careful neutrality she used when dealing with troubled patients. She wondered if Margaret and I were okay and mentioned a strange tension she felt when we were together. I tightened my grip on the phone. I wondered how much she knew or if Dave had told her about their scheme. I asked what made her think that. She told me about little things she had noticed. Margaret seemed stressed about money, which was odd given the business was doing so well. She also said that Dave kept asking her strange questions about my company's structure, like who the partners were and who controlled what assets. She paused, then said it felt like they were trying to pry information from her, but she couldn't understand why. My daughter's training had allowed her to pick up on their manipulative behavior, which Margaret and Dave believed they had successfully hidden. I carefully explained that it was probably just curiosity about the business world and that Margaret had always been interested in financial stability. But Brianna did not sound convinced. "Dad," she said, "if something was really wrong, you'd tell me, wouldn't you?" Her question hung in the air between us like a loaded gun. How could I tell her that her mother was plotting to ruin me financially, that her husband was the one organizing it all, and that the family she had believed in her entire life was a lie? "Of course, sweetheart," I replied. "But everything is fine. It's just the usual business stress." After we hung up, I sat staring at my notes. Dave had been using my daughter to get information about my business structure. The extent of their spying was more widespread than I had first thought. I decided it was time to make sure they got exactly the information I wanted them to have. I was still thinking about Brianna's warning about Dave's information gathering when my secure phone line rang. It was Sarah Chun, my accountant of 12 years, her voice clear and professional. She told me that the asset protection documents were ready to be signed. She had taken the liberty of looking into the best structures when I had mentioned updating my estate planning. After a brief pause, she said she knew this was about more than just estate planning. She was very perceptive, and her 28 years in forensic accounting had taught her to read between the lines. She asked if she should inquire about the type of threat we were protecting against. "The domestic kind," I replied. Her silence said it all. She had helped with the divorces of 3 of my construction crew supervisors and was familiar with this territory. She assured me that she would have everything ready by noon. The business assets would be completely safe from any personal legal action, and whoever was planning to go after my personal finances would not even see the real money. By 10 in the morning, I was sitting across from Tom Bradley, the president of First National Bank and my golf partner of 15 years. The mahogany conference room smelled of coffee and leather, a familiar setting where I had negotiated dozens of construction loans. I explained that I needed an account security review and slid some documents across the polished table. I told him that all joint access points needed to be verified and temporarily frozen until an identity confirmation could be made. Tom's eyebrows rose slightly. He noted that the list was very comprehensive, covering every joint account, credit line, and automatic payment system. He asked if he could inquire, but I said he could not, though I smiled when I said it. I asked him how long it would take for the security holds to take effect. He told me that as soon as I signed, All account holders would receive a notification that they would need to verify their identity in person with a photo ID and other documentation to regain access. Tom studied my face and pointed out that this would be a major inconvenience for Margaret. I told him that I was counting on it. The security holds were put in place at 11:47 in the morning. This was just as Margaret was sitting down for her weekly lunch at Riverside Country Club with 3 other wives of construction business owners. My phone buzzed with the first notification of a declined transaction at 12:03 p.m. I was in the middle of reviewing contractor bids when Margaret's panic call came at 12:50. She told me that something was wrong with our accounts. Her card had been declined at lunch, and when she called the bank, they had told her there was a security hold. She asked if I knew anything about it, sounding completely innocent. She made no mention of the joint account with Dave's name, the missing $47,000, or that she had been moving money without my knowledge. I told her that a security hold sounded serious and asked if they had said what triggered it. She told me it was something about verifying identity and account access and said it was embarrassing because she was sitting there with Linda, Susan, and Janet and couldn't even pay for her own lunch. I could hear the real distress in her voice, not because her plan was at risk, but because her social status had been publicly shamed. After 25 years of marriage, I knew her priorities. I assured her that I would call Tom Bradley right away and that we would get it sorted out. But I did not call Tom. Instead, I drove to the construction site where my crew was pouring the foundation for the new medical center. The familiar sounds of the machinery and the workers' voices felt like solid ground after 3 days of financial war. My phone buzzed with text messages from Margaret throughout the afternoon. At 1:47 p.m., she texted that she still couldn't get into any of our accounts and that the situation was ridiculous. At 2:23 p.m., she texted that Tom Bradley's secretary had told her he was in meetings all day and wondered what kind of bank president is too busy for his best customers. At 3:15 p.m., she texted again, saying that even our emergency credit line was frozen and asking how she was supposed to buy groceries. Each message gave me a sense of grim satisfaction. For 25 years, Margaret had taken her financial security for granted while I worked 60 hours a week to provide it. Now she was experiencing what it felt like for that security to disappear without warning. Dave's reaction, however, was even more interesting. At 4:30 in the afternoon, my private investigator, Mike Rodriguez, called me with an update. He told me that Dave had tried to access the shared account with my wife 3 times that afternoon. When that failed, he tried to withdraw funds from what seemed to be a trust account, probably my daughter's education fund that he was managing. Mike confirmed that it was frozen too, just as I had instructed. Dave was making angry phone calls to bank representatives, threatening legal action and demanding to speak with management. It was the classic response of an overconfident lawyer who had just realized his power was gone. By 6 in the evening, I was home, looking over the day's financial battlefield from my office. Every shared account was frozen, every joint credit line was suspended, and every automatic payment system required my personal authorization. Margaret's access to our 25 years of wealth had been reduced to whatever cash she had in her handbag. The security measures were entirely legal, a husband protecting marital assets while his estate planning was being reviewed. Tom Bradley would confirm that standard banking procedures had been followed precisely. But Margaret and Dave would get the message. The man they had planned to financially ambush was not playing defense anymore. My phone rang at 6:47 p.m. It was Margaret's number, but I knew the voice on the other end would be desperate, not manipulative. It was time to see how quickly conspirators turned against each other when their plans began to fall apart. The security guard at Thompson and Associates hardly looked up as Margaret rushed into the lobby at 7:15 p.m., her heels clicking frantically on the marble floor. I knew this because Mike Rodriguez had been sitting in a coffee shop across the street with a clear view of the building entrance. The frantic call Margaret had made from our driveway had been loud enough for our next-door neighbor to overhear. She had told Dave that they needed to talk immediately because something had gone terribly wrong. It was clear that Margaret no longer cared about being discreet. On the 14th floor, Dave's corner office glowed with the intensity of an emergency meeting. Anyone with binoculars could see 2 people huddled over a conference table covered with documents, their body language shouting, "Crisis management. He knows." I could hear her saying that I knew something and was cutting her off from everything. She couldn't even buy gas for her car. Dave's response was sharp and professional, his litigation voice fully engaged. He stated that the timing was no coincidence. He reminded her that 3 days ago, I had shown up unexpectedly at Brianna's house just when they were talking about their plan. He said I must have overheard something. She wondered how much I could have heard, and he replied that it was enough to understand that they weren't playing around. Papers rustled as he looked over documents. He said that they needed to assume I had recorded their conversation and that everything they had said about assets, timing, and strategy was now potentially documented. The silence that followed said it all as the two of them realized their victim had been several moves ahead while they had been congratulating themselves on their own cleverness. Margaret's voice had lost its former confidence when she asked him what they should do. He said they would accelerate everything and no longer take a gradual approach. The next Monday morning, he would file for emergency divorce proceedings with a request for immediate alimony. They would claim that I was engaging in financial abuse by restricting her access to our marital assets. Margaret's tone became sharper with interest when she repeated financial abuse, saying that it sounded legally powerful. Dave continued, explaining that they would portray me as a controlling husband who used money to manipulate and intimidate. The frozen accounts would become evidence of my abusive behavior, not a defensive strategy. I could hear more papers rustling as his unethical mind shifted into a full-on attack. He told her she would need to document instances of emotional abuse, financial control, and intimidation tactics. He wanted her to think back over our marriage and remember any time I had made financial decisions without consulting her, questioned her spending, or used money to influence her behavior. She replied that it would be hard because I had never been controlling about money. If anything, I had been too generous. He then said they would reframe my generosity as manipulation. My providing for her would become evidence that I had created financial dependency to keep control. Every gift, every luxury, every comfortable lifestyle choice would become proof of my systematic isolation strategy. Their breathtaking audacity was shocking in its scale. They were planning to turn 25 years of my love and generosity into evidence of abuse. Margaret asked about Brianna and said that she would not automatically take her side because her psychology training made her skeptical of everything. Dave replied that this was perfect. His voice carried the satisfaction of a man who had found his closing argument. He explained that Brianna's hesitation to support her would immediately become evidence of how thoroughly I had manipulated family dynamics. They would present her psychology training as something I had used to turn my own daughter against her mother's emotional needs. Margaret asked if he wanted to make our daughter a witness against her father. He responded that he wanted to save her financial future. He explained that Brianna's professional training meant her testimony would carry extra weight, and if she expressed any concern about family dynamics, they would present it as an expert psychological opinion that confirmed my manipulative behavior. The plan was brilliant in its complete cruelty. To turn my daughter's professional skepticism into evidence against me, to reframe every act of my love as manipulation, and to change my financial protection into proof of abuse. Dave continued, saying that on Monday morning, he would file for emergency restraining orders to prevent me from moving any more assets. He would also request immediate alimony of $15,000 a month and temporary, exclusive occupancy of the house. By Wednesday, he would have me portrayed as an abusive husband who needed court supervision to prevent further financial intimidation. He said that if I fought back, they would escalate. He would file harassment charges if I contacted her directly, stalking allegations if I investigated their activities, and emotional abuse claims if I questioned any of their accusations. His voice held a cold satisfaction. He explained that the beauty of domestic abuse law was that denial became evidence of guilt. The harder I fought, the more controlling I would appear. Margaret's laughter was chilling. She said I had no idea what I had started after 25 years of being a trusting husband. It was time to teach me that nice guys finish last. They spent another hour coordinating their stories, setting up secure ways to communicate, and preparing for what Dave called total legal warfare. Every conversation, every interaction, and every financial transaction would be documented as evidence of my systematic abuse. The conspiracy had grown from a simple money grab to a full-blown character assassination designed to destroy not only my finances, but also my reputation, my relationship with my daughter, and my standing in the community I had helped build for 3 decades. As Margaret finally left the building at 9:30 p.m., her phone was already buzzing with a text from Dave. He reminded her to remember that she was no longer an angry wife, but a terrified victim who had finally found the courage to escape her abuser. The war had officially begun. Saturday morning, Margaret and Brianna met at Caf Luna, the bistro where they had been having a mother-daughter brunch once a month for 5 years. Margaret had chosen their usual corner table, which was intimate and private, perfect for confidential conversations. But this time, she had positioned herself as a woman seeking her daughter's professional help rather than just maternal support. "Brianna," she said, her voice sounding deliberately vulnerable, "I need to talk to you about your father. I think something is wrong with him mentally." Brianna put down her coffee cup with the same careful precision she used when dealing with troubled patients. "What kind of wrong, Mom?" Brianna asked. "Controlling behaviors, paranoid thinking," she said. "He's been restricting my access to our accounts, claiming it's for security reasons." Margaret let her voice trail off, allowing her daughter's imagination to fill in the blanks. "How long has this been going on?" Brianna asked. "Months, maybe longer. I just thought it was work stress. But yesterday, he completely froze me out of every account we share. I couldn't even buy lunch." Brianna leaned forward, her psychological training kicking in despite her personal involvement. "Mom," she said, "financial control can be a form of domestic abuse, but it can also be a legitimate form of financial management during business transitions or legal matters. What is your dad's explanation?" The question was too direct and too professionally neutral. Margaret had been hoping for emotional support, not a clinical analysis. "He claims it is routine account security, but Brianna, I have been married to him for 25 years. This is not routine. This is punishment for something." "Punishment for what?" Brianna asked. Margaret hesitated, wondering how much she could reveal without giving away her own scheme. She said that she thought I suspected she had been questioning our marriage and that I was trying to intimidate her into staying. "Mom," Brianna said, her voice showing the patience of someone who had spent years treating manipulative patients. "Are you telling me that Dad is financially abusing you to stop a divorce? Or are you telling me that you are considering a divorce and Dad is protecting his assets?" The difference was too close to the truth. Margaret changed her strategy. "I'm telling you that your father has been acting strangely," she said. "And as a psychologist, I thought you might have some insight into what is happening." "As a psychologist," Brianna replied, "I would say that major behavioral changes usually have clear triggers. What happened 3 days ago that might have caused your dad to suddenly restrict access to the accounts?" Margaret's mind raced. Brianna was too well trained to accept emotional manipulation without proof. Each question she asked revealed the holes in Margaret's story. Margaret replied that she did not know what had triggered it, and that was what scared her. But Brianna was studying her mother's face with clinical detachment, reading her facial expressions and the inconsistencies in what she was saying with a professional skill. "Mom," she asked bluntly, "are you asking me for psychological advice, or are you asking me to take sides in a marital conflict?" The question shattered Margaret's manipulative strategy. Her daughter was not going to give her the emotional support that would validate her story. "I'm asking you to help me understand what's happening to our family. Then I suggest you have an honest conversation with your dad about his concerns instead of asking me to psychoanalyze him based on your interpretation of his behavior," Brianna said. Margaret left the cafe 20 minutes later, furious at her daughter's professional detachment and worried about the implications. If Brianna refused to automatically support her mother's claims, the victim's story would fall apart under professional scrutiny. Meanwhile, 40 minutes away at Allen Construction's headquarters, I was receiving information that would completely change the battlefield. Jim Morrison's call came in at 10:15 in the morning, just as I was looking over weekend job site reports. He told me he thought I would want to know that Dave was having problems with the State Bar Association. The word was that they were looking into his handling of contractor payments on the Mitchell case. I asked what kind of problems. He said that 3 subcontractors had filed complaints last month about not being paid. Dave had collected the fees from his client, but had never paid the tradesman. He said it was a classic trust account violation if they could prove it. I put down my coffee cup, my mind immediately thinking about the implications. I asked how serious it was, and Jim said it was serious enough that the Bar Association had scheduled a hearing for next week. Dave was scrambling to find $23,000 to pay the subcontractors before the investigation ended. $23,000, I realized, the exact amount Dave owed, according to my own research. I asked Jim if those subcontractors would be willing to talk about their experience with Dave if someone from the construction community contacted them. He said they absolutely would because they were furious. Dave had promised to pay them for 6 months, always with excuses, blaming the delays on his client or court procedures. He told me they were small business owners who could not afford to take those kinds of losses. I spent the next 3 hours making strategic phone calls. I spoke with Bob Martinez of Martinez Electrical, who had been waiting for $7,400 for 8 months. I spoke with Steve Chun of Chun Plumbing, who was owed $9,200 since last October. And I spoke with Randy Foster of Foster Roofing, who was still waiting for $6,500 from a job completed in November. Each conversation followed the same pattern. I made them seem like professional courtesy calls from my company checking on references before possibly hiring Dave for legal services. Each contractor was eager to warn me about Dave's payment habits, his ethical shortcuts, and his professional unreliability. By 1 p.m, I had documented evidence of Dave's pattern of using client trust accounts as his own personal bank, which was a violation of state bar rules. He was also misleading subcontractors about when they would be paid. At 2:30 p.m, I called the State Bar Association's ethical complaint hotline. I told the intake specialist I wanted to file a formal complaint about an attorney's misconduct. Daniel Thompson, I explained, had a history of violating client trust accounts and making misleading statements to construction industry professionals. The complaint form asked for extensive documentation. I gave them the names of the contractors, the amounts they were owed, a timeline of his misrepresentations, and evidence of his systematic misuse of client funds. I also arranged for 3 additional contractors to serve as witnesses if needed. By 4 p.m., Dave's law office was receiving calls from the Bar Association about expedited investigation procedures and a mandatory hearing. His professional reputation, the very foundation of his conspiracy against me, was now under formal ethical review. At 4:47 p.m, my phone buzzed with a text from Mike Rodriguez. Thompson just left his office carrying 3 boxes of files, heading toward his car. Want me to follow? No need, I typed back. I knew exactly where he was going. Dave would be driving straight to Margaret, with panic overriding his usual caution. The conspiracy that had started with confidence and careful planning was about to become a desperate scramble for survival. I decided to let them panic and make mistakes. The real war was just beginning. 2 days of professional crisis had given Brianna time to process everything she'd learned. The drive to Allen Construction's headquarters felt like traveling toward a reckoning she'd been avoiding her entire adult life. My office building stood solid against the April sky, a structure of brick and steel and honest workmanship. Everything Dave's glass tower pretended to be but wasn't. Sarah, my secretary for 8 years, greeted Brianna with the warmth she reserved for family members who actually showed up to job sites and company picnics. He's expecting you, honey. Go right in. I stood when she entered, reading her body language with the careful attention I'd learned from watching Margaret's moods for 25 years. But Brianna carried herself differently. Her posture was professional, her distance clinical, and her bearing was that of someone who had made a difficult decision. Dad, we need to talk about what's happening between you and Mom, she said, her voice carrying the same careful neutrality she used with troubled patience. I've spent 2 days analyzing the situation, and I need to understand your perspective. What has your mother told you? I asked. That you're exhibiting controlling behaviors, financial manipulation, and possible emotional abuse, she replied, sitting across from my desk with her hands folded precisely. She wants me to support her victim narrative using my professional credentials. The clinical language was jarring coming from my daughter, but I recognized her strategy, to distance herself emotionally to evaluate the facts objectively. And what do you think? I asked. I think Mom tried to manipulate me the same way she's apparently been manipulating you, Brianna said. Her green eyes, so much like Margaret's but clearer somehow, studied my face. Show me the evidence, Dad. I need to hear what you heard. I hesitated. Once I played that recording, there would be no protecting her from the truth about her mother and husband. But Brianna was 30 years old, a licensed psychologist, and capable of handling reality. I pressed play on my phone. Margaret's voice filled the office. When the old fool finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for. For the first minute, Brianna's expression didn't change. Professional detachment held as she listened to her mother mock 25 years of marriage, heard Dave calculate legal strategies for maximum financial damage, and absorbed their cold discussion of the timeline and asset division. But when Margaret's voice said, 2 years of playing the devoted wife, Brianna's composure cracked slightly. Her hands clenched once, then relaxed. The recording ended, and a silence stretched between us like a bridge neither of us wanted to cross first. "How long have you known?" she asked finally. 6 days. I overheard this conversation at your house last Tuesday. And you've been what? Building a defense strategy while pretending everything was normal? She asked. Something like that. She leaned back in her chair, processing. Mom asked me to evaluate your mental state. She wanted me to provide a professional opinion that you were exhibiting abusive patterns. What did you tell her? I asked. That I couldn't ethically assess someone without a proper evaluation, and that her claims seemed inconsistent with your established behavior, Brianna said, a note of anger in her voice now. She tried to use my training as a weapon, Dad, against you and against professional standards. The weight of the betrayal settled between us, not just mine, but hers. I'm sorry you've been dragged into this, sweetheart, I said. I'm not, she replied, her tone sharpening with resolve. I'm glad I know the truth. The question is, what happens now? I studied my daughter's face, seeing the strength I'd helped build, but the independence I couldn't control. That's your choice, Brianna. I won't ask you to choose sides. I already have, she said, standing up. The decision was made. I choose truth over family loyalty. I choose evidence over emotion. And I choose to support the parent who didn't try to manipulate my professional ethics. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by concern. What about Dave? What about him? Her voice went cold. My husband participated in a conspiracy to financially destroy my father while using my psychology practice as a cover. That marriage is over. Brianna, I started to say. Dad, I'm not making this decision in anger, she interrupted. I'm making it based on a character assessment and behavioral evidence. She moved toward the door, then paused. I'll testify honestly about the family dynamics if needed, but I won't be anyone's weapon, including yours. I understand. Good, she said, because there's one more thing I need to do. She left my office with the determined stride of someone who had found moral clarity in a situation designed to destroy it. 20 minutes later, she would be walking into her own home to confront the man who'd betrayed not just me, but the professional ethics she'd spent years building. I sat alone in my office, surrounded by the evidence of 35 years of honest work, and felt something I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began. Hope that the truth might actually matter. Brianna's key turned in the lock at 7:30 p.m., and Dave's startled expression revealed he hadn't expected her home early. He sprawled on our living room couch, legal documents scattered across the coffee table, a half-empty whiskey bottle within reach. We need to talk, she announced, setting her purse down with deliberate precision. Rough day, he said, not looking up from whatever case file he was pretending to review. The Barrett deposition got postponed again. I know about the conspiracy, Dave, she said. His head snapped up. The careful lawyer's mask slipped, revealing something desperate underneath. What conspiracy? The one where you and my mother planned to financially destroy my father while using my psychology credentials to support false abuse allegations, she said, still standing to maintain her advantage. I heard the recording. Every word. He put down his whiskey glass with exaggerated calm. Brianna, I think you're misunderstanding. 2 years of playing the devoted wife. Sound familiar? She asked. The color drained from his face. Dave Thompson, who could argue cases before the state Supreme Court, suddenly looked like a man watching his world collapse. How much did you hear? He asked. Everything, she said, finally sitting across from him, maintaining a professional distance. The asset division strategy, the timeline, your fee calculation, Mom's performance reviews. She paused, and her next question was a whisper. Was our entire marriage part of this plan? 3 days later, Margaret discovered that social destruction moved faster than legal proceedings. The Riverside Country Club's dining room buzzed with Saturday brunch conversation, but clusters of women fell silent as she approached their tables. Linda Patterson, her bridge partner for 5 years, became fascinated by her Eggs Benedict when Margaret stopped to say hello. Susan Morrison claimed she had an urgent phone call rather than continuing their conversation. By the time Margaret reached her usual table, she understood that the conspiracy had become public knowledge. "Margaret, dear." Janet Crawford's voice carried a false sweetness. "We missed you at the planning committee meeting yesterday." "What meeting?" "I wasn't informed," Margaret said. "Oh, didn't you get the message? We had to make some organizational changes, you understand." Margaret was beginning to recognize the pattern. Phone calls not returned, invitations rescinded, social doors closing with whispered efficiency. Meanwhile, I was conducting my own campaign with considerably more success. 35 years of honest dealings had earned me a credibility that no legal maneuvering could destroy. My lunch with Tom Bradley at the bank was strategically productive. I shared my concerns about the family difficulties with just enough detail to establish facts without seeming vindictive. "Margaret and our son-in-law have apparently developed concerning plans regarding our assets," I mentioned over coffee. "I've had to implement some protective measures." Tom's response was exactly what I had hoped for. Professional understanding mixed with personal sympathy for a friend dealing with family betrayal. The Chamber of Commerce Board meeting that evening was equally valuable. When Jim Morrison asked about Margaret's absence from the recent fundraising dinner, I explained with genuine sadness about the marriage difficulties that had come to light. "Sometimes you discover people aren't who you thought they were," I said, allowing disappointment to show. "Well, I'm grateful I found out when I did." By Sunday evening, Margaret's social isolation was complete. The country club membership committee scheduled a routine review of her status. The charity board accepted her resignation from positions she'd never submitted. Dave's professional collapse accelerated alongside Margaret's social exile. 3 major clients ended their relationships with him, citing concerns about his judgment and ethical standards. The Miller Industries account, worth $200,000 annually, sent a formal letter expressing a loss of confidence in counsel's professional discretion. Margaret's frantic Sunday night call to Dave carried a desperation I could hear through their apartment's thin walls. "Everyone knows, Dave. Everyone. I can't show my face anywhere in this town." "We'll file emergency motions Monday morning," he replied. "Force Alan into a defensive position." "Before what? Before you lose your law license? Before I move back to my sister's house in Minnesota?" Their mutual recrimination session lasted until midnight. 2 conspirators were discovering that shared guilt was not the same as shared solutions. Tomorrow would bring their last desperate gambit. I was ready. Monday morning found Margaret in Linda Hawthorne's downtown office, a divorce attorney whose reputation for scorched earth tactics had earned her both notoriety and high fees. The glass conference room overlooked the courthouse where Margaret hoped to destroy me, but the lawyer's expression suggested limited optimism. "Mrs. Cole, I've reviewed your materials," Linda said, her voice carrying professional skepticism. "Your husband's financial protective measures appear legally sound. Joint account holders have the right to restrict access during marital discord. But it's financial abuse," Margaret said, her desperation leaking through her victim persona. "He's controlling every aspect of my access to money we earned together. Money he earned, according to tax records spanning 25 years, Linda replied, consulting her notes. "Your income contributions appear minimal. You haven't been employed outside the home since 1989. Margaret's face flushed. Being a homemaker had represented luxury and security. Now it looked like evidence of dependency. "What about emotional abuse, intimidation tactics?" Margaret asked. "What specific incidents can you document?" Linda asked. The question hung in the air. Margaret had spent sleepless nights trying to build believable abuse patterns from 25 years of my genuine consideration and generosity. "He's controlling about money. Always has been." "Can you provide examples of threats, physical intimidation, or isolation from family or friends?" Each question punched holes in Margaret's fabricated story. I had never raised my voice in anger, never restricted her activities, and never questioned her friendships. 10 blocks away, Dave was discovering that bar association investigations moved with bureaucratic efficiency when they wanted answers. Monday morning's ethics committee call carried implications beyond contractor payment delays. "Mr. Thompson, We've received additional complaints regarding your handling of client trust accounts, specifically allegations that you've been using client funds for personal expenses pending case resolution. Dave's hand tightened on the phone. Those allegations are unfounded, he said. I've always maintained proper accounting. We have documentation from Martinez Electrical showing invoices submitted 8 months ago, with promises of payment pending client approval. The voice on the phone continued. Yet your client settled 6 months ago. Where are those funds currently? The answer was in his personal checking account, where contractor payments had been diverted to cover his office rent and student loans. What had seemed like resourceful cash flow management now appeared to be embezzlement. There may have been administrative delays, he stammered. Mr. Thompson, the voice said. We're scheduling a formal hearing for Thursday morning. You'll need complete financial records for all client accounts dating back 18 months. By Wednesday evening, Margaret and Dave had reached the desperation that breeds dangerous decisions. Their emergency strategy session in Dave's nearly empty office felt like generals planning a final assault with no ammunition. We have to file domestic violence claims, Margaret announced with false confidence. It's the only way to force him into a defensive position. Margaret, false domestic violence allegations are felony charges if we're caught, given the evidence he probably has, Dave said. What evidence? I've never said anything in front of cameras or witnesses that would contradict. She stopped, remembering the recording that had started this cascade. The recording proves we were planning a financial strategy, not documenting his abuse. So, we reframe it, she said. Your legal expertise, my victim testimony. We make the narrative about long-term emotional manipulation and financial control. Dave stared at her across the conference table. 6 months ago, she'd been a bored housewife seeking excitement. Now she was proposing perjury in a federal court. If this fails, we're both facing criminal charges, he said. If we don't try, I'm facing poverty, and you're facing disbarment anyway, she replied, her voice carrying the calculation of someone who'd lost everything except the ability to take others down. At least this way we go down fighting. Thursday morning's restraining order hearing would determine whether their last-ditch effort would succeed or whether they had simply given me more evidence for my prosecution case. The Davenport County Courthouse felt different on May 1st, as if 35 years of honest reputation had crystallized into something tangible I could carry into battle. Judge Patricia Hendricks presided over domestic relations court with a no-nonsense efficiency, having seen every form of family deception imaginable. Margaret sat at the plaintiff's table with Linda Hawthorne, wearing the carefully chosen outfit of a battered wife, a conservative dress, minimal makeup, and a nervous demeanor that might have been genuine given the stakes. Mrs. Cole, Judge Hendricks began, reviewing the emergency restraining order petition. You allege your husband has engaged in financial abuse and intimidation. Can you describe specific incidents that led you to fear for your safety? Margaret's voice trembled with a practiced vulnerability. Your Honor, for months, my husband has been restricting my access to our accounts, monitoring my spending, and making threats about what would happen if I tried to leave. What kind of threats, Mrs. Cole? The judge asked. Financial threats. That I'd be left with nothing. That he'd use his business connections to destroy my reputation, Margaret said, pausing for effect. Last week, he completely cut off my access to money, even for basic necessities. I watched my wife of 25 years perjure herself with increasing confidence. Each lie built upon the previous one, creating fictional abuse from a man who'd spent decades providing every comfort she had demanded. Judge Hendricks turned to my attorney, James Morrison. Does the defendant wish to respond? James stood with a calm authority he had earned through 30 years of practicing law without suborning perjury. Your Honor, we have evidence that Mrs. Cole's claims are not only false, but part of a deliberate conspiracy to defraud the defendant of marital assets. That's a serious allegation, Counselor, the judge said. We have an audio recording of Mrs. Cole and her co-conspirator, Daniel Thompson, planning this exact scenario 6 weeks ago, James replied. Margaret's face went white. Linda Hawthorne whispered frantically in her client's ear, but damage control was impossible when your entire case was built on lies. I'd like to present Exhibit A, James continued, connecting his phone to the courtroom's audio system. Margaret's voice filled the chamber. When the old fool finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for. For 43 minutes, Judge Hendricks listened to the complete conspiracy unfold. Margaret's mockery of our marriage, Dave's legal strategies for asset seizure, and their calculated plan to manipulate Brianna's psychology credentials. The man actually believes I love him, Margaret's recorded voice declared with casual cruelty. I watched my wife's fabricated victim narrative crumble in real time. Her coached testimony about fearing for her safety became absurd when contrasted with her recorded laughter about manipulating the old fool. Judge Hendricks stopped the recording. "Mrs. Cole, do you have any response to this evidence?" Margaret's mouth opened and closed silently. Linda Hawthorne's face had gone pale as she realized her client had used her to file fraudulent court documents. "Your Honor," Linda said carefully, "I request permission to withdraw from this case. I was not informed of these circumstances when I agreed to representation." "Motion granted," Judge Hendricks said, fixing Margaret with a stare she reserved for perjurers. "Mrs. Cole, I'm dismissing your restraining order petition with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for an investigation of possible perjury charges." The gavel fell with a finality that echoed through the courtroom. 2 weeks later, the divorce settlement reflected Margaret's spectacular miscalculation. Her documented deception eliminated any claim to spousal support, and the prenuptial agreement she'd forgotten about, signed eagerly in 1987, limited her to a minimal asset division. Dave's law license suspension became a permanent revocation when the Bar Association discovered $127,000 in missing client funds. Last I heard, he'd moved to Nebraska and was working as a paralegal. Brianna filed for divorce the day after the hearing, citing irreconcilable differences. She's building a new practice focused on family therapy, with a particular expertise in recognizing manipulation patterns. 6 months later, Margaret works retail at the same mall where she once spent my money on luxury items. The irony isn't lost on either of us. I rebuilt Allen Construction's reputation even stronger than before. The community's support during my family difficulties translated into new contracts and deeper business relationships. The house feels different now, quieter, but honest. No more fake conversations or calculated affection. Just the sound of rain on windows I built with my own hands in a home that's finally mine again. Margaret had been right about one thing. I really had believed she loved me. Now I know the difference between love and performance.